February marks Black History Month. Lots of events and activities taking place throughout the city to celebrate Black history, culture, and art. Some of the biggest and most important names in Black history buried at Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn, from artists to physicians to civil rights activists. You can learn more about them with Brooklyn's Black Trailblazers. It is a guided trolley tour that will take you to the grave sites of these great Black Americans. Joining us now is David Glover. He leads the tour of Brooklyn's Black Trailblazers. It's great to have you with us this morning.
Thank you so much, Rocco.
Important month. Of course, before we get to some of these important Black Americans buried at Greenwood, let's talk about Greenwood in general.
Yeah.
A lot of people may have never been there before. It's a cemetery, but so much more than a cemetery.
Yeah, I think when people think cemeteries, they usually think marble or concrete and darkness and scary movies. But Greenwood Cemetery is one of my favorite places to be in New York. It's a Class 3 arboretum, which is fancy words to say it's a special kind of botanical garden for trees. Some of the largest of their species in the state of New York are there. It is sprawling with beautiful greenery, and there are also several lakes there, several ponds, excuse me.
And all kinds of great programs you provide there,
Yes.
especially artistic programs.
There is a ton of programming. So there's trolley tours, there is horticulture, there are restoration, folks who want to learn how to preserve old buildings and things like that. There are other, there are weddings, there are lively events that happen there. There's programming during Halloween time. There's a lot of fun to be had in a space that some might not necessarily think could be that.
So the name cemetery doesn't quite tell it all, but there are almost, what, 600,000 grave sites there?
Yes.
Let's talk about your Black Brooklyn Trailblazers. This was part of Black History Month. The first one on the list, a name probably most people have heard, Jean-Michel Basquiat.
Yes, so Jean-Michel Basquiat, he's born in New York in 1960, and he is living through a heroin epidemic that's in the country, the burgeoning of hip-hop, and he is at the forefront with the artist Al Diaz of starting graffiti movement that takes the world by storm.
Died at a young age, 27, so he's one of those artists always forever young, right? So he has that appeal, too.
And he goes from being born in Brooklyn with parents of Haitian and Puerto Rican descent and makes his way to becoming one of the world's geniuses. His last artwork, I think, in 2017 sold for $110.5 million.
And when you talk about him related to Black history, his impact on history, what would you say that is?
I think Basquiat, his impact is that he represented the people. He represented youth. He represented young Black folk in the inner city in New York, and also a real sort of American conundrum of dealing with a drug epidemic. And someone who was able to push through and create, even out of that, some really remarkable world-renowned art.
And before we move on, and really unusual for a Black artist to gain prominence, right? So he sort of kind of opened that door.
Exactly.
Too.
His artwork combined poetry, phrases, and it dealt directly with classism, racism, and other things in America. But I think the thing that he really was turning on its head with this idea of high art and low art. And the critics could not contend with the fact that he really kind of destroyed some of those critical art views and changed the way we see it.
Let's talk about a name that maybe some people don't know about, Susan McKinney Stewart. She was a physician and an author, but not just any physician, the first Black woman to earn a medical degree in New York State.
That is correct.
Amazing.
And it's kind of fascinating. You go to Greenwood Cemetery and you start to realize there are some of the most prominent people who have some of the firsts of many different kinds in this country. She was inspired due to the fact that of 10 children, she was the 7th born. She lost a brother during the Civil War, and the cholera epidemic was happening, and she decided to devote her life to medicine and had a 43-year career.
Also fought for racial inclusion and women's rights. Sounds familiar, even today, right?
Yeah. She graduated top of her class, valedictorian, in 1870. And to put that into perspective, that's just a few years after the Emancipation Proclamation.
Yeah, amazing. We'll have time for one more. Charles Reason, a mathematician, a linguist, and an educator, the first Black college professor in the country.
Yes, he was a brilliant political journalist. He fought not only as a mathematician, a linguist, and an educator, but he fought for the right for folks to vote. And he would go on with his, as a prodigy, he was a child prodigy with math. He'd go on to become the first Black professor in the country.
In our final moments here, what do you want people to get out of not only just Black history, but this tour. What do you hope that they absorb from this?
I hope that folks come to an understanding that Black history is American history. And so it doesn't just belong to folks who are of color. It is truly our story as Americans. And if you come to the Brooklyn Black Trailblazers tour, I can assure you, you're going to have a fantastic time. You're going to learn some things you never thought. Because
David is leading the tour. That's why taking place next Saturday, yes. Greenwood Cemetery will put up the information there for people can get ticket information and more, greenwood.com. David, appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Rocco.